I'm John Talkington with Apex Network Solutions, where we help you manage your technology so that you can manage your business. And we're going to have a discussion here today with my friend and colleague, Anthoney Parker, who is the owner of One Stop IT Solutions. I think that's the correct title for you, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Tony has been in the IT industry for how long, Tony?
Oh, upwards of 40 years at this point.
I have been, I've been 30, 35, something like that. So a little bit of experience here. We wanted to have a conversation today about password security and what that means, what the risks are, how to manage it, how to mitigate it, all those kinds of things. So I was just talking to Tony about a couple of situations I've had recently where customers have had email passwords compromised, and a compromised email password, access to your email is access to your money, is what I say.
Absolutely true.
Tony, we lost you.
There we go.
We've still got your audio, but we lost your video. There you go. Any case, we do so much business through our email that email is one of those places where password security is critical. Tony, what do you see? What's been your experience with passwords and how to keep that stuff safe?
Right. So a couple of situations that we've had. We've had a couple of breaches where we've had to kind of go in and do scrubs. So right now the conversation is what is the cost of the effort of implementing two-factor authentication when it's available for your banking account, whether it's for your benefits, for your health, your logins, your medical. So when those become available, go in, turn those on. If you have to, use the support pages to find out how to turn on two-factor authentication. And because as soon as, and the other thing that I'm talking to people about is the reuse of the same password. So people are using the same passwords over and over and over in different locations. So if someone happens to get your AOL account, and I just throw AOL out there because it's, it brings a chuckle to those of us who's been around.
It's the IT guy's favorite punching bag, yes.
Right, exactly. But if someone gets access to the password of your AOL account, does that in turn give them access to your current bank account or your current medical or your current fill in the blank, access into your business, access into your web page, access into your quick? So these are the types of things that we need to discuss and start using. Do you want to use passphrasing, things that are easy to remember? Do you want to allow the auto generation of passwords with all of the jumble mumble? And then in doing so, making sure that you have a password manager of some sort turned on so that you can capture that and keep it all in one place where it's managed. So,
back to your point for just a second about reusing passwords. Little known fact, most end users are using the same password in at least 4 different sites. So if you're using it at AOL and the AOL account gets compromised, or you were using it at LinkedIn or Yahoo when those password databases got compromised, if you didn't go change it in the other locations, that password's now out there in the wild and easy for a hacker to go back and say, hey, I know he was using this password 4 years ago. Let's see if it works on any other services.
And you'd be surprised how many locations you have passwords that are out there. Just as an example, let me pull up my password manager.
What are you using for a password manager?
I'm using a subscription to LastPass.
Okay.
So there's freeware out there, and freeware is, it's a good start. But if you can buy, and this is going to be my recommendation, if you can buy a base level of subscription, and there are a number of them that are out there, right? And I have a list here somewhere. Right now, I'm using LastPass. I do subscribe to it. When I look at my A to Z folder, I'm looking at, oh my goodness, probably times 30. So 100 and maybe not 30. Let's say 20. At least 100 to a little bit over 100 different password sites that I've, over the last 6 months, where I've created some sort of profile along with an associated password. Now, some of these sites have 2 and 3 locations. Like, for example, Wells Fargo. It seems as though there are 2 locations where I'm logging in. Not sure what the difference is, but if I were to go in and take a look, my guess is one is probably a refresh page as opposed to the initial login.
Right.
So, but just know that it's worthy. Spend some time, go through and find something that's easy to work with. Again, if you want to reach out, we can have some conversations with you about different software that's out there.
There are a number of different pieces of software out there. LastPass is popular. Dashlane, I think, is one. There's some others. I personally use a program called RoboForm, which I've been using for probably a decade. I got involved with RoboForm as my password manager the last time LinkedIn had a big password breach. And at that point, I set up with RoboForm, and I went through every login I could think of and created a brand new password for every one of them, so that my passwords are genuinely unique. And true story, I do some dark web monitoring for some of my clients, and I do it on my own email so that I get some notification when passwords have been compromised. I found that one of my random generated passwords had been compromised.
Really?
And because it's unique, I knew specifically which web page's password database had been compromised, and I was able to contact the administration of that web page and say, "Hey, your passwords database has been compromised. You need to let your users know." Now, it wasn't a password. It was a recreational site. It had no financial information on it at all. And because I'm not reusing that password, it wasn't a huge risk for me. But I did go change the password, and I did let the administration know that their password database had been compromised so that they could let their other users know, because some of those users may be using that same password in more than one location. I liked what you had to say earlier. You said, talking about passphrases as opposed to passwords. Best practice today is to think of them as passphrases.
Mm-hmm.
Longer phrases, not a word, not a word with some letters substituted with numbers or symbols, but a longer phrase with punctuation and capitalization and the whole bit. Easier for the end user to remember, harder for the password hackers to guess at.
Right. The longer the letter, if you can get beyond a 6 or an 8 letter password or 8 character password, get into those 12 and 15 and beyond pass. At that point, think of something. I don't know, John. I've heard you give really good example historic about with a phrase in it. I'm not creative, so I've been using the generated, allowing the books to generate it. Now, what I'm starting to notice is looking at the types of passwords or the requirements in the password. So what do we have? We've got uppercase, lowercase, number, special character, minimum number. So if you've noticed, the minimum number has gone from 6 to 8, and now it's probably starting to get up to 10 or 12 these days.
Yep.
Yeah. So, the longer and the more complex, the harder it is for that to be cracked. And then the other thing that we want to talk about is how often do you rotate it? How often do you change it?
And that recommendation, I feel like, is changing at the moment. It used to be that people said you should change your passwords every 90 days. Where do you currently fall on that? And I'm gonna end up covering you up here for just a second because I want to.
So there's what I recommend and what I practice.
Well, start with what you recommend, and then we'll talk about what you practice.
So I'm going to say at a minimum once, especially your securities and your financial, change them up period. Okay, 90 days it's a lot to manage. It is an absolute lot to manage. But at a minimum, you want to at least start considering, like I said, your financials. You want to look at rotating them every 6 months to 12 months. If you have the bandwidth to do it every 90 days, absolutely. In this case, more is better. You don't want to be too fanatical about it, because then you'll get lost. But again, using some sort of judgment. Now, like I said, what I recommend versus what I practice might be two different.
So I popped up here on the screen the password generator that RoboForm uses. I currently have mine set to generate 16 character passwords that include upper, lower numbers and symbols. Some services don't accept the symbols or don't accept all the symbols. It gives me the option to edit this list of symbols. And I can sit here and tell it to generate new until I see one that looks complicated enough for me. They're all pretty much there. I fall in a slightly different spot when it comes to password replacement. I recommend that businesses set up some sort of password monitoring. There are services out there that will monitor the dark web, the hacking sites, other things for known compromised passwords that are associated with your business emails. So you get a notification when a password has been compromised. And then change the password when you know it's been compromised.
Okay.
And rather than rotate them every so often. And the problem with rotating them every so often is that it is a huge bandwidth drain. If you're not using a password manager, you're actually more likely to reuse the same password in multiple sites and change them all at the same time because it's the only way you're going to remember what they are. Or you're going to write them down and leave them sitting on your desk.
Right.
Where a cleaning crew can pick them up or something of that nature. And so if you're using a password manager so that the passwords can be genuinely complicated and you're monitoring the dark web for password compromises, then you can relax that requirement to change the passwords on a periodic basis. Maybe you change your master password for your password manager every 90 or 120 days. But you don't have to change all the others unless you know there's been a compromise. And so, particularly if you're like me, and I'm gonna pull this up again here real quick. If I pull up my RoboForm editor, you were talking about how many passwords you had saved. I'm just gonna start at the top of the list, and I'm gonna scroll down to the bottom of the list. And if you'll count for me as I go down, let me know when you get to 300.
Okay.
Because right about there, we hit 300.
Do you have a counter on there?
I'm sorry, No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I'm guessing. I've got passwords. And if I tried to go change all those passwords every 90 days, even every 120 days, it would take me a day.
Right.
Well, a day's worth of labor, that just paid for the password manager for the next 2 years.
Absolutely.
Maybe 4 years. It's password managers, subscription password managers are not that expensive. I'm talking about The one I use is, I think, $40 a year for my family of 5.
Right.
So we've got, it's costing us whatever that is, $7 a year, roughly, $7 or $8 a year per user for the password manager.
Right.
That's nothing compared to the level of security. I had a customer whose email password got compromised, and it was nearly a $30,000 loss. If the banker hadn't been paying attention, when the email came legitimately from their customer to them asking them to transfer the money, if it hadn't raised a red flag for the banker, the bank would have sent the money and he'd have never gotten it back, because it was a legitimate request from his email address.
But it was from a legitimate email request, but the request itself wasn't legitimate.
No, the request itself was fraudulent. It was sent by the hacker, but it came legitimately from the banker's customer's email.
Wow.
Following a pattern that was common for that customer and that banker.
Wow.
And there was one little piece of the transaction that didn't make sense to the banker, and so they picked up the phone and called the customer and said, "Hey, how do you want me to handle this? We've got an issue with this transaction. How do you want me to handle it?" And he said, "What transaction?" And at that point, they put the brakes on it. That was potentially very bad.
Were they able to identify the person who? Were they able to?
I don't know. The bank and my customers sent that off to the authorities, and we gathered what we could about IP addresses from the logs and tried to straighten that out.
Wow.
This is why email security and really paying attention to what's going on in your email is so critical, because, as I said earlier, access to your email is eventually access to your money. If you're not keeping that secure, people think of email as being, it's not that big a deal, it's just email. Well, email is a big deal. You think about, I want to really secure my financial accounts. I want to really secure my credit card accounts. I want to really secure these kinds of things. But they think of email as being it's just email. Email doesn't matter. Guess what? Email matters a lot. You mentioned earlier two-factor authentication. Tell people what two-factor authentication is and how that typically works.
So two-factor authentication is a secondary step that's inserted into the login, whereby you have a token. And some of you guys may have had a little physical token where you had like a little key fob that you used to do. And there was a rotating number that was being generated. Well, now that's moved into an app. And there are a couple of popular apps that are out there. One is from Google, one is from Microsoft. And I'm using the Google one, right?
I'm actually using both. That's my Microsoft one up there. And again, you'll see how committed I am to two-factor authentication.
Exactly. I've got a handful of them here.
Yeah.
And I'm using them for my business, so that getting into my manager, my front end and my back end, I've got it turned on. I've got it turned on for my bank. I've got it turned on for a few others. But what happens here, and if you'll notice when you're looking at you'll see some digits that are being generated, and in there you'll see a little countdown timer, and they're rotating. So what you do with the two-factor authentication is you log in like you normally would, and then you would get a secondary page. So in that secondary page, it's going to ask you for a code. You would come to your trusty dusty little app here. You look at that code. You punch that code in and hit enter, and boom. Now notice it rotates every 30 seconds
or so.
So, and what it does is it just adds an extra layer of authentication before you get into your actual application, whatever it is you're trying. I used to refer to it as the bane of my existence. However, after some of the stories that John has shared, some of the things that we've seen that are out, really, again, it's price versus cost. What is the actual cost of not having two-factor authentication. It may take you an additional, say, 45 seconds to get logged in, but what is that worth in case if it's not there and you do get company?
So here's the thing. I start talking about two-factor authentication to clients, and they say, well, that's complicated. It's not something I'm used to doing. But it is something they're used to doing. They just don't know they're used to doing it. If you make a transaction with a debit card, what happens? You slide the debit card or you put the chip in and you type in a PIN. So you're combining something you have, the plastic card, with something you know, which is the PIN. Two-factor authentication flip-flops that. It's something you know, your password, with something you have, your phone. Right?
Oh, that's a great analogy.
And so two-factor authentication, it can be an app, it can be a text message with a one-time password. We see a lot of that with Apple and Microsoft.
It can be an email.
It can be an email. Some apps will actually just pop you up and give you an approve or deny. So
it can be a text message.
Right.
You make it like there are many examples where you'll see Amazon or someone will say, "Hey, this is a new device that you're logging into." What they'll do is they'll give you a phone number. They'll say, "Please supply the last 4 digits of this phone number." You put it in. They send. If you put in the wrong 4 digits, boom, that's an indicator that you're not that person.
Right.
Right. So again, we are living in a two-factor world.
Two-factor authentication is not really new. People just don't know they're doing it.
Right.
I really like setting it up in the app because then I don't have to, respond with a phone number and then wait for the text and then put in the code. If it's set up in an app where you can look at the rotating number, or if you're using Microsoft's app and you're logging into a Microsoft site, it'll actually just pop up and say, "Hey, do you want to approve this login?" You hit yes. It's less typing. Google the same way. If you're logging into a Google account, you're using Google's Authenticator app. There's a way to turn on a push notification where you can just hit yes or no. This is a valid login. And why this stops hackers is even if they figure out what your password is, they don't have your phone. And so they don't have that second piece.
Here's a question, John. So for my team, we've got 2 FA turned on. When we log in, I've got multiple members logging into the same site. Do we each have a unique key, or are our 3 keys synced to each other during the login process?
That's a question for whoever's managing the 2FA for that site. I would tend to think that if you're logging in with the same account details, you'd have to have the same
sync
token.
Key.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're logging in with individual credentials, which would be better for auditing purposes to know this person did this versus that person did that, always better to have individual credentials. Then each individual would certainly have their own unique 2FA key.
Right. Okay.
And
I just wanted to put that out there for that's all.
And like I said, I'm using 2FA for email. I'm using it for my Facebook page, believe it or not. I use it on LinkedIn. I use it on Amazon. I use it in a bunch of different places. I went through about, 2-3 months back and logged into every website I had a password for and went looking to see, is 2FA available? And if 2FA was available, I turned it on.
Wow.
So like my list of 2FA is, and I'm using 4 different apps because a couple of those sites will only use their own 2FA app.
Right.
That's okay. That's fine. I'm willing to put up with a little bit of hassle in order to keep those accounts secure. The other discussion that we need to be having with business owners, not so much with end users, but with business owners, is frequently, let's face it, if you're a business owner and you have employees, at some point, you're going to have a separation from an employee. Yes, we all wish we could hire somebody and keep them on for 10 years, but at some point, that employee is going to get a better job, or they're going to, their spouse is going to move and they're going to have to move with them, or something's not going to work out right and you're going to have to let them go. You hate for that to happen. Something's going to cause you to have to separate for that employee. Business owners will frequently think about, we got to kill their login to the server and we need to change their email address. But they don't think about, they had a login to, at least limited access to the Wells Fargo account or the bank account. They had a company credit card and they've got login information for their company credit card. Maybe they've got, other ancillary services, QuickBooks Online or whatever, where they've got access to your company data that isn't physically within your building. If you don't have some way to list what those services are, then when they leave, maybe you shut some of them down, maybe you forget to shut others down. You've actually left data out there accessible. So it's important for business owners. Business owners don't have to know what the passwords are necessarily. Maybe better if they don't, from a security standpoint, from an auditing standpoint. But they need to know what those accounts are. They need to know how to go disable those accounts when there's an employee separation that happens. They need to have a list of those things and ideas in their heads, at least, of how they're going to manage that long term. Absolutely true.
Absolutely. Now, did you want to talk about single sign-on today?
I'm not opposed to talking about single sign-on today. Single sign-on being a way you can create for your company a single sign-on where your users log into that one portal, and then that portal manages sign-ons into the ancillary services. Really great for mid-sized to larger organizations that have, a way to create those connections on the back end to manage the single sign-on experience. It simplifies things for their employees. They're logging in one time with one password, and then the back end of that, those passwords rotate on a regular basis, and there's the employee then doesn't know the sign on to the bank account because it all manages in the background with the single sign-on solution. Really great solution for medium to large companies, fairly expensive for smaller companies to implement. Certainly something if you've got 50 employees, you ought to be talking about.
Right. I would say 30 employees. Yeah.
Possibly. You got to look at those costs. What does the cost per month for an employee come to be, and where does that work out versus password managers and the amount of effort? So there's a cost calculation there. But certainly once you get above a particular, if you've got 5 employees, it's probably not economical for you to implement a single sign-on solution. If you've got 30, maybe you're on the bubble. If you've got 50 or more, you ought to be talking about it if you're not.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember implementing single sign-on, and I remember thinking, this is actually a reverse of security, where you're logging in one time and all of a sudden everything opens up. But I would like to, just kind of share with people that you're not opening yourself up to a breach. And I remember thinking, I remember having the sense that it was the opposite of security, by logging in here. So as soon as I log into my PC, my web browser logs in, my RMM logs in. Like you said, all of the ancillary things behind the RMM. And I'm thinking, well, if somebody got that one, then boom, they're into everything. But the fact of the matter is that it is a coordinated effort. It is for the convenience. And think about this. Convenience and security are in direct opposition.
So there are ways you can manage it. Yes, if they get into the single sign-on, they've got access to everything that user has access to, which means it becomes really vital that the single sign-on uses 2 factors.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Good point.
That's a vital piece. If you're going to implement a single sign-on solution, you've got to be using two-factor authentication for that single sign-on. Otherwise, yes, you're opening yourself up. The big advantage to going to a single sign-on solution is that now, if you separate from an employee, you disable their access to single sign-on, and you've disabled their access everywhere.
Exactly.
And so it becomes, from a management standpoint, once it's set up, it becomes easier to manage. And so there are some, and again, you got to get to a particular size before it makes financial sense,
right.
Because there are some management pieces that have to happen in the background. You have to have somebody technically capable of managing all those back end pieces. But from a, particularly if you've got you got 20, 30, 40, 50 employees or more, and you got a fairly high turnover rate, so that you're hiring and letting go 2, 3, 5 people a quarter.
That's a big turnover.
That's a big turnover. If you don't have a single sign-on, then managing all of those ancillary passwords takes so much time from your technical support team that maybe it becomes financially a lot cheaper to run single sign-on than it does. Those are the business considerations.
Right. Absolutely true. Good point.
So, in any case, hopefully, we don't want to let this conversation go on too long. Hopefully, we've given you some sort of sense today for how important securing those passwords are, for managing access to services are, for business owners particularly. It's important for individuals too, but like I said, I've had business owners that have had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars at risk because passwords got compromised. It's a huge part of what we need to do as IT consultants to talk to our customers about why this is important, what their options are. It's important for business owners to understand what their risks are so that they know what's an appropriate amount of money to spend on mitigating those risks. So hopefully, Tony and I have had an opportunity today to help you understand that a little better. If you need more information, feel free to reach out to either one of us. I'll pop contact information up when I upload this. I'll pop contact information up so that you can get a hold of us. We'd love to hear from you if you have questions about password security and password management or other IT issues. We'd be happy to discuss them with you. Tony, I want to thank you for taking your time today to jump on this call with me and to have this discussion. And we'll catch up on other subjects at another time, I'm sure.